I don't think that it was the one reason why I murdered Ella.
In the American legal system, we often treat violent crime as a byproduct of unchecked animal emotion, rage, panic, or a sudden loss of sanity. But what happens when a crime is born not from a lack of control, but from a flawless high IQ architecture of malice? In February of 2027, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles will review one of the most disturbing juvenile murder cases in modern history. Not to decide whether Paris Bennett committed the crime. He admitted that he did nearly 20 years ago. And it's not to retry evidence that happened long ago. Instead, the board must answer a much more difficult question. Has the child who committed that murder become a man who can safely return to society? Because that's what the parole board asks. Not what did this person do, but who has this person become? And in a case like this, there may never be an answer everyone agrees on. To understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. Nearly 20 years earlier, 13-year-old Paris Bennett murdered his 4-year-old little sister Ella. The crime shocked the country. The sentence seemed straightforward. 40 years in prison, case closed. Except it wasn't. Because the story didn't end with the conviction. In many ways, that's where the hardest questions began. Most people remember that Paris Bennett killed his little sister. Few people know why. Over the years, investigators, psychologists, documentary filmmakers, and even Paris himself have painted a far more complicated picture than the one many people remember from the headlines. According to the evidence, and by Paris's own later admissions, Ella was never his true target. The person he wanted to destroy was his mother. And if that's true, then this case isn't simply about one of America's youngest killers. It's about how the child who once saved his mother's life became the one to destroy it. To understand this story, you first have to understand Charity. Long before the headlines, before the investigations, before anyone had ever heard the name Paris Bennett, Charity was simply a young mother trying to build a better life for herself and her son. She has spoken openly about her struggles with addiction as a young woman, but she has also said that everything changed the day she learned she was pregnant with Paris.
I was 18. It was totally not in the plan, but from the minute I found out that I was pregnant, I immediately fell in love with Paris. I was a crazy teenager. By the time I was 17 years old, I was strung out on heroin, had skipped the 10th grade, and then graduated high school with honors. About a year after I got sober and I met Paris's dad, but I was miserable still. Everybody had been telling me that you get sober, you get your life together, it'll get better. Well, it wasn't. It was just hard without anything to take the edge off of it. So I had made a deal with myself that if I'm not happy in a month, I'm gonna overdose. But when I found out that I was pregnant with Paris, he saved my life. It didn't matter anymore how hard everything was. I knew I had Paris to look forward to. And I used to tell him that one of these days, you're going to have to remind me to tell you how you saved my life. 13 years later, of course, he destroyed it.
By every outward appearance, Paris was an exceptionally bright little boy. Curious, articulate, funny. He had an extraordinary IQ. Adults often commented on how mature he seemed for his age. At home, he and his mother shared a bond that Charity believed could never be broken. She has described Paris as affectionate, loving, and deeply attached to her. Looking back now, it's almost impossible to reconcile those memories with the crime that would later define both of their lives. But in those years, that future hadn't happened yet. To Charity, he wasn't a future killer. He was simply the little boy who had saved her life. But families don't change all at once. They change slowly, often so gradually that no one notices until they're looking back. And for the Bennett family, that change began with hope, the birth of a little girl named Ella. No one could have imagined that years later, Charity would lose one child to murder and another to prison. Ella was born in 2002. Like many other siblings, Paris experienced the adjustment that comes with no longer being an only child. But according to Charity, something unexpected happened. He quickly fell in love with his little sister.
Paris was not happy when I was pregnant with Ella, and I was concerned. But the day that Ella was born, he fell in love.
For years, there appeared to be every reason to believe the two children shared a normal brother and sister relationship. Nothing about those early memories suggested what was still to come. Families don't remain frozen in time. As Ella grew older, life became more complicated, and Charity relapsed into addiction. The stability she had worked so hard to build began to slip away. During that period, Paris often found himself helping care for his younger sister. Looking back, Charity has questioned how much that period affected him. Other people have questioned the same thing. Was he overwhelmed? Did he feel abandoned? Did resentment begin to grow? No one can answer those questions with certainty, but almost everyone agrees the family they had once been was changing. Exactly how much those changes influenced Paris remains impossible to measure.
I felt betrayed. I felt neglected. And really just a child's selfish thought of, am I not important enough? But I don't think that it was the one reason why I murdered Ella.
For decades, psychologists have debated whether psychopathy is primarily inherited, shaped by environment, or the result of both. The Bennett family offers no easy answers. In 1980, Paris's grandmother, Kyla, stood trial in Cobb County, Georgia, accused of conspiring to murder Charity's father.
When I was 29, my husband, Charity's father, was murdered. Charity was 5. About a month after the funeral, the police talked to me, and I was arrested and charged with murder. I spent 6 weeks in jail, and then I was on trial for 6 weeks. Lots of things came out in that trial that just pretty much threw me for a loop. But I was acquitted. I had to work to get my company back on its feet. I had to fight to keep my contracts with the government, and I had a child to raise, and I didn't have time to sit around and brood over spilt milk. Up until Charity was 12 years old, she was the most wonderful, loving child that anyone could wish for. We were inseparable. And then from 12 on, it's like an alcoholic. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. She was a good manipulator. But we all are. Paris is, Ella was. I would be lying to you if I said that I wasn't. We all manipulate each other. We're all spoiled rotten. My other daughter, Caitlin, I don't think she's quite as good. She didn't have as good a teacher because I don't do it so much anymore. I don't have a company to manipulate. I don't have drivers to manipulate. And I don't have a jury to manipulate. So.
While the court found insufficient evidence for a conviction, the comment raises an objective, disturbing question for criminologists. Can the traits of extreme manipulation and a lack of cognitive empathy be passed down through generational lines, manifesting years later in the calculated actions of a grandson? After the murder, people searched for warning signs, and one question surfaced again and again. Were there opportunities to prevent what happened? Psychologists have also examined these early years for indications of psychopathic traits. Home videos from his early childhood reveal moments that in hindsight take on a sinister meaning. In one clip, a young Paris walks up behind Ella, placing his hands directly around her neck. In another video, while playing a harmless game of airplane in a ball pit, Paris lifts the baby into the air, but as he mimics the sounds of an engine, he clearly mutters the words, "I'll kill you," as he sets her down. Perhaps most disturbing of all is an exchange with his mother. When asked what her least favorite sentence is, she replies that she doesn't know. Paris immediately answers for her, asking, "Kill Charity's children?" before the camera abruptly cuts off. Approximately 3 months before Ella was killed, Paris reportedly attempted to stab Charity.
Paris tried to stab Charity at the house one day. So we took him to a psychiatric place up in Wichita Falls. Charity wouldn't let me go with her to pick him up. And I never even found this out until after Ella was murdered and we were talking with the police. But the psychiatrists up there had evaluated Paris, and they had told Charity that he had homicidal tendencies. And she didn't leave him in treatment there. She chose to take him back.
I believe it was November of 2006. And then Ella died February of 2007. I feel like even if Paris had stayed at that place, it wouldn't have helped him. I don't know, I can't spend a whole lot of time anymore double guessing the past. And I don't have any regrets, except for the fact that I had relapsed.
Whether a different decision would have changed the outcome is impossible to know, but it remains one of the most difficult questions surrounding this case. Hindsight has a way of making everything appear obvious. February 4th, 2007 began like thousands of other Sundays, except this was Super Bowl Sunday and Charity had to work. A babysitter was arranged to stay with the children. Nothing about that day suggested it would become one of the most infamous days in American criminal history. Paris convinced the babysitter that she could leave early. He told her that he was old enough to watch Ella himself. She agreed. With the babysitter gone, Paris and 4-year-old Ella were alone.
Abilene 911.
Hello?
Abilene 911, go ahead.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. My sister.
Okay, where's your sister now?
She's in the bed.
Is she breathing?
No, I looked. I feel so messed up.
Okay, calm down, okay? I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's your sister's name?
Her name is Ella. Ella Bennett.
How old is Ella?
4.
She's 4 years old? How old are you?
13.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yeah, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
What did you stab her with?
A knife.
Okay, where'd you stab her?
Lots of places.
Okay, Paris, where's the knife?
It's on the bed with her. I didn't mean to.
I know, Paris. Okay, I want you to stay calm for me, okay? Okay, listen to me. Paris? Paris?
During the call, he claimed Ella wasn't really Ella. She was a demon, and that he was scared and he didn't mean to. According to the investigation, Paris first watched violent pornography on the family computer. Investigators also concluded that he sexually assaulted Ella. He then attempted to strangle her. When that failed, he stabbed his 4-year-old sister 17 times. The attack lasted long enough that investigators later concluded Paris had multiple opportunities to stop. He never stopped. When it was over, Paris did not immediately call 911. Instead, he called a friend. The two spoke for several minutes before Paris finally dialed emergency services. At first, the story raised obvious questions. Was Paris suffering from hallucinations? Had he experienced a psychotic break, or was something else happening? For a time, even Charity desperately wanted to believe mental illness explained what had happened. Because if Paris had truly lost touch with reality, then perhaps the son she loved was still somewhere inside him. It was a hope she clung to, but it wouldn't last. As investigators continued examining the evidence, the demon story began to fall apart. The physical evidence, Paris's own behavior, statements he made after the murder, and information recovered during the investigation increasingly pointed in another direction. This had not been a sudden psychotic episode. The evidence suggested something far more disturbing: planning, purpose, choice. And over time, even Paris himself would begin telling a different story.
I remember being angry all day long and thinking all day long, I want to hurt somebody if I'm going to snap. And it wasn't initially Ella. I thought about the babysitter. I thought about going down the street and seeing somebody I knew. And I thought about hurting a stranger. I don't remember exactly what point I decided it's going to be Ella. For a few moments, for a few minutes after it happened, it almost seemed like it was a dream, like it hadn't just happened. Because I had left the room and everything, and I was just hyperventilating. And then I had walked back in, and I had looked, and I had seen Ella and what I did. And it hit me like a punch in the gut that, no, I really just did that. And I called 911 because I felt like I need to do something about this. Maybe they can do something. Maybe it's not too late.
Investigators reached a conclusion that was both simple and deeply unsettling. Ella wasn't the source of Paris's anger. By his own later admissions, the person he wanted to destroy was his mother. Ella became the means of doing it. Years later, Paris acknowledged that killing Ella was the most effective way to hurt Charity. Paris participated in a televised interview. Charity and a couple of behavioral experts watched and listened from another room as Paris was questioned about his motive. He was asked whether investigators had accurately understood his thinking, that he had considered multiple targets, including his babysitter, his mother, and ultimately his 4-year-old sister. Specifically, he was asked whether leaving Charity alive to endure the loss of Ella had been the most devastating punishment he could inflict. Paris admitted it. He described carrying what he called a hot flaming ball of wrath toward his mother for years. He explained that he chose Ella because he knew the loss of a child would be the worst pain he could cause Charity. And in his own words, he had found a way to take away both her children in one fell swoop. It wasn't simply an act of violence. It was an act of revenge. And by every account, he succeeded. Understanding motive, however, doesn't necessarily mean understanding Paris. Over the years, psychologists and behavioral experts have consistently described him as exhibiting psychopathic traits. They pointed out that he doesn't really show a lot of empathy or emotions, if any at all. They talked about how his affect is very flat. He could be talking about ordering a cup of coffee, reading a book, or the murder, and he has the same flat tone. No emotion, no remorse. One behavioral expert offered an interesting analogy. It would be like asking a colorblind person to describe the color red. Well, they can't see it, so they can't describe it. Paris can't feel love, so he can't describe it. Because during the interview, he was asked if he loved his sister. He said he loved his sister, but when pushed a little further about if he knew what love was, he had a really hard time describing love or what love felt like. He said it wasn't something that he could point to and say, that's love, and I have felt that, or I feel that. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting analogy. Throughout multiple interviews, Paris presents himself as thoughtful, intelligent, and remarkably self-aware. He openly discusses his diagnosis. He analyzes his own behavior. He acknowledges feeling anger, but when asked about love, empathy, or remorse, his answers often become noticeably more difficult. Whether that's evidence of genuine self-awareness, carefully practiced manipulation, or something in between remains open to interpretation. The interviewer pressed Paris further. If his goal had been to inflict the greatest possible pain on Charity, had it worked? Had seeing her lose one child to murder and the other to prison bring him the satisfaction he expected? This time, Paris's answer was different. He said no. He insisted he never felt a sense of accomplishment or victory. He described himself as completely estranged from the person he was at 13, saying he could no longer comprehend how he had ever believed killing Ella would solve his problems. And that brings us back to the question we asked at the very beginning. Has Paris Bennett changed? There are people who believe he has. Others believe he hasn't. Others believe he can't. In February of 2027, that responsibility belongs to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. Whatever decision the parole board eventually makes, no one understands the consequences of that decision better than the woman he once admitted he was trying to destroy. Charity Bennett, the one person who has lived every side of this tragedy. For nearly 2 decades, Charity has lived with a reality few people could ever imagine. She is the mother of the little girl who was murdered, and she's the mother of the son who murdered her. Every interview, every memoir, every public appearance reveals a woman trying to answer questions that may never have answers, not only about Paris, but about herself. In the days immediately following Ella's murder, Charity desperately wanted to believe her son. When Paris claimed he had been hallucinating, she searched for any explanation that might make sense of the unimaginable. She hoped mental illness had stolen the little boys she knew, because the alternative, that he had knowingly and deliberately murdered his sister, was almost impossible for her to accept. But as the investigation continued, and as Paris continued talking, that hope slowly began to disappear.
Paris had positioned himself in a chair in the very back of the room. He said, "You used to say that you would never be able to kill anybody unless they hurt one of your kids. I bet you didn't think it was going to turn out like this. So what are you going to do now?"
Unfortunately, accepting the unimaginable is exactly what she had to do. Reading Charity's memoir today, it's possible to watch that transformation unfold page by page. At first, she defended Paris. Then she questioned him.
Went to see him that night. I was like, I don't believe you anymore. I think you killed your sister on purpose. All of a sudden, he became a completely different person. It's like he no longer had to keep up this act anymore. He looked at me and he said, "Y'all are so stupid." He laughed at me.
Eventually, she began questioning herself. She wrote about replaying every decision she had ever made as a mother, wondering what she had missed, wondering whether she should have known, and finally coming to a conclusion no parent ever wants to reach, that her son had chosen to kill, not because he was lost, but because he wanted to. Even after accepting what Paris had done, Charity still faced another impossible question. How do you mourn the child you've lost without abandoning the child you still have? She has written openly about feeling torn between Ella and Paris. If she fought for Paris, did she somehow betray Ella? If she walked away from Paris, did she fail him as a mother? There were no good answers, only impossible choices. Over time, Charity chose forgiveness, not because she excused what happened, not because she forgot, and not because she believed Paris should avoid responsibility. She forgave because carrying hatred had become another prison.
After Paris killed his sister, I was not trying to get Paris off. I wanted to get Paris help.
But forgiveness didn't restore what had been lost. It didn't erase fear, and it didn't mean their relationship could ever return to what it once was. Eventually, Charity made one final decision. She ended communication with Paris, not because she stopped loving him, but because healing sometimes requires distance. Her responsibility was no longer only to the son who remained in prison, it was also to herself and to Phoenix, the young son who still depended on her. And today, as Paris's first parole review approaches, Charity once again finds herself living with uncertainty, not knowing what the future holds, only knowing she has already survived more than anyone should ever be asked to.
Nobody prepares you for when it's the two people you love most in the world and one kills the other. What do you do then? So even though I know it's for the best and I know it's the healthiest and safest option, yeah, I miss him. I just don't miss what he does or who he is.
Today, Paris Bennett remains incarcerated in the Texas prison system. He has spent nearly 2 decades behind bars. During that time, he has participated in treatment, completed educational programs, and given multiple interviews discussing both the crime and his own psychology. Those interviews reveal a man who speaks openly about the murder, his diagnosis, and the way he views himself today. Paris insists the 13-year-old who killed Ella no longer exists. He says he has spent years trying to understand himself, accept responsibility for what he did, and become someone different. Whether that's enough is another matter entirely. Because parole isn't based solely on whether an inmate believes they've changed. It's based on whether the evidence convinces everyone else. Whether those conversations reflect genuine insight, carefully practiced self-awareness, or something in between is one of the questions the Parole Board will eventually have to consider. In February of 2027, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles will begin reviewing Paris Bennett's case for the first time. Their responsibility isn't to decide whether he deserves forgiveness or whether his interviews sound convincing. Their responsibility is far more specific, to determine whether Paris Bennett can safely return to society. It's a decision built on evidence, professional evaluations, victim input, institutional records, and risk, not certainty, because certainty simply doesn't exist. Even if parole is denied, that doesn't necessarily mean Paris Bennett will spend the rest of his life in prison. Under his current sentence, absent future legal changes, he is scheduled to be released in 2047. He'll be approximately 53 years old. That reality changes the conversation, because regardless of what any of us believes, the question of Paris Bennett's future is no longer hypothetical. One day, someone will have to decide whether he can safely live outside prison walls. Over the past 2 decades, investigators have shared their conclusions. Psychologists have offered their professional opinions. Paris has spoken for himself, and Charity Bennett has allowed the world to witness a journey few people could ever imagine. Each perspective reveals another piece of the story. None of them removes the uncertainty. Perhaps that's the hardest truth this case has to offer. No evaluation can predict the future with certainty. All anyone can do is examine the evidence, consider the risk, and make the most informed decision possible. Parole doesn't erase the past. It asks whether the past still predicts the future. In February of 2027, that question moves from theory to responsibility. You've seen the evidence, you've heard the interviews, you've followed Charity Bennett's journey. Now imagine carrying the responsibility of deciding whether Paris Bennett has changed enough to someday live outside prison walls. Whatever your answer may be, one thing is certain: the consequences of that decision will last far longer than the hearing itself. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary thoughtful and informative, I'd appreciate your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd also like to hear your perspective. Based on the evidence we've explored, do you believe Paris Bennett has changed enough to someday return to society? Or do you believe the risk remains too great? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.